Now let us try to learn about the human brain. This is a very important part of this chapter called control and coordination. So whenever we say control and coordination, human brain would obviously be a very integral part, because that is where all the core thinking happens. So this is the diagram that is given in the textbook. Let us first try to understand the diagram. The human brain, as you can see on the screen, has been divided into three parts. One is the forebrain, other one is the midbrain, another one is the hindbrain. Now, forebrain means the top or the front portion of the brain. So we call this as forehead. Likewise, forebrain is the topmost portion of the brain, or the front portion of the brain. That is called as forebrain. And we have something in the middle, which is called as midbrain. And also we have something behind, okay, something at the back of our head, little lower, that is a little above the back of the throat, that is called as hindbrain. Now, when we consider forebrain is the most important thinking part of the brain. So forebrain occupies the most of the space here. As you all can see, all this coiled thing is forebrain. So it occupies the most space. And also in higher grades, you'll be learning that forebrain is also divided into lobes. So what we mean by lobe, L-O-B-E, is regions. So the front portion of the forebrain is called as frontal lobe. We have frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and all of that. So the whole of this forebrain is divided into regions, and each region is called as a lobe, and each of this lobe is specialized to a particular function. So what I mean by that is a particular lobe is dedicated for memory, particular lobe is dedicated for all calculations and counting and all of that. Particular lobe deals with hunger. When you feel hungry, your brain knows that you have to go and eat. So all of that is being controlled by forebrain. In short, I would say forebrain controls all the thinking, all the memory, all the sensory things also. Sensory in the sense, what you are able to see, what you perceive, what you're able to hear, all of that is controlled by the forebrain. Now, there is another part called as midbrain, which is present at the middle of the brain. It is called as the midbrain. And the midbrain consists of two important endocrine parts, which is hypothalamus and pituitary gland. So we have learned about this pituitary gland in the animal hormones. Hypothalamus is another one that contributes towards the endocrine system. So we learn about all of them in detail. So this is the midbrain. And we also have something called as the hindbrain, which is present at the back. And that consists of three further subparts, which is pons, medulla, and cerebellum. Pons is also called as pons veroli. Medulla's full name is medulla oblongata. And cerebellum is nothing but the other part. So these three together will constitute the hindbrain. There is something else called midbrain, and there is something called as the forebrain. So before we look into the details of each of them, two more things that we need to understand is cerebrum is nothing but whole of forebrain and midbrain together. So the whole of brain is divided into cerebrum and cerebellum. So whatever you see, you are able to see this cauliflower-like thing, that is called as cerebellum, and this is the cerebrum. Cerebrum is the majority large part of the brain, and this is the cerebellum. And one more thing, if you look at the brain in straight view, you can see that the brain is divided into two halves, left hemisphere and right hemisphere. We all know that left hemisphere controls the right part of the body, and right hemisphere controls the left part of the body. So, and also there is a stem that is extending from the brain, which is called as the spinal cord, which actually performs a very important function called as reflex action, about which we have seen in another recording. So, and also, as you all can see, there is a box that is covering this brain for protection, because we may dash against our head against some wall or something, or during some accidents. There is a natural helmet that is present, which is called as the cranium. It is also called as the skull. So there is this skull is very, very important. So this cranium protects the brain, delicate brain, from external injuries also. And there is also an addition which I would like to add, which is called CSF. The CSF stands for cerebrospinal fluid. So this fluid is present inside the cranium, and this fluid actually helps us to prevent mechanical shocks when we get injuries and all of that. This fluid helps. This fluid is basically present somewhere here in this region, that is helping us to avoid accidents and all of that. Like even if we get an accident, the damage doesn't go too much into the brain. That's because of cerebrospinal fluid. This is just an addition. It's not given in the textbook. So with all of this, let us try to understand more about each and every part of the brain. When it comes to the functions of the forebrain, as you all can see, forebrain has some divisions in the sense there is the major part which is called as the cerebrum. So the forebrain is also called a cerebrum in general. The cerebrum is responsible for the main thinking that happens in the brain. When I say thinking, it's about like decision making in your life, like whether you have to go and eat, which career you're going to take, and all of that. That is based on cerebrum. And then cerebral hemispheres. Cerebral hemispheres, in the sense, the whole of this cerebrum is divided into two hemispheres, two sections, left and right. So those are responsible for intelligence and voluntary actions. Intelligence in the sense, memory, whether you're able to remember something and how you're able to take a very good decision in life and all of that. And also voluntary actions. Voluntary actions is, for example, if you want to stand from your place and go to the kitchen, that's a voluntary action. You will understand what is the involuntary action when I explain medulla. So voluntary in the sense, something that an action that you do by thinking out of your own will, that is called as voluntary actions. And forebrain also has some dedicated centers which are also called as olfactory lobes. We have seen this word olfactory in two other places. One is in acids, base, and salts, where we identify whether it is an acid or a base through smell, and that is called olfactory indicator. And the other one is we have seen this olfactory receptor in this same chapter. So that actually helps us to understand centers of smell. For example, if you have a person who is wearing jasmine flower, so you can, even without looking at them, you understand that, okay, you're getting the smell, fragrance of jasmine, something like that. So which means the smell of jasmine has already been stored in your brain, and you're able to take it whenever you need it, and your body is able to understand that it is jasmine or rose or whatever. And diencephalon is also two parts of the brain. I mean, cerebral hemispheres and diencephalon all are almost the same. And this part is also responsible. So all the four are almost the same, but they have given different words to make you understand what they actually, what is the main function of it. So diencephalon has centers of hunger, thirst. Whenever you feel thirsty or hungry, then you go for diencephalon. So diencephalon comes into play during those times. When it comes to midbrain, as you all can see, midbrain controls some reflex movements. So what I mean by reflex movements is sometimes we actually do something with our head, neck, and trunk. So neck and head, trunk is basically below the neck, our main body, in response to visual and auditory stimulus. What this means is visual is whatever you are able to see, and auditory is whatever you're able to hear. And stimulus is a trigger that we get from an outside environment. Now, when, for example, when you see something which is which is not so good, or which there is a lot of dust that's coming, so you immediately turn your head, and that is also a reflex movement. So a part of these reflex movements are actually controlled by the spinal cord, which we already saw as reflex action. But a few reflex movements with respect to the head, neck, and the trunk is also controlled by the midbrain, especially the reflex movements which we do in response to whatever we see and whatever we hear. For example, if there is a very pleasant noise, or for example, let's make it simple. If you have a friend and the friend is saying something which is a secret, and he's saying it in a very feeble tone. So what we immediately go near the friend. We actually lend our ear. So we are actually doing a movement, and those movements are controlled by the midbrain. So likewise, anything that you see, which is very tiny, you immediately go towards that and you see it much more closely. And all these reflex actions are controlled by the midbrain. Also, it also controls the reflex movements of the eye muscles, which means whenever you have to close your eyes or change in the size of pupil. This also means that, for example, so pupil is basically the opening of our eyes, which actually allows the light to enter, which we have studied in human eye, the chapter called human eye. So when there is a lot of light, we actually try to make our eyes like this. We actually shorten our eyes. But when there is very little light and there is dark, full of darkness, and when there's a power cut, you open your eyes wide in order to let as much amount of light as possible. So that is also controlled by the midbrain. And also shape of the eyelids. To an extent, shape of the eyelids is controlled by the ciliary muscles, which we have learned in human eye, but also to an extent by midbrain as well. Now, hindbrain is the most important part because it consists of three parts. The first one is called pons. It regulates respiration in the sense we are not thinking that we have to respire. We are not thinking that we have to breathe. We have been doing it even now. When I'm talking, when you're listening, we are doing it. So pons actually regulates this respiration, this rhythm of breathing in and breathing out. So pons is the part which actually regulates respiration, and it relays information between the cerebellum and cerebrum. So yeah, so pons is something that regulates respiration, and also pons behaves as it acts as a relay between cerebellum and cerebrum. We'll understand what is cerebellum. So cerebellum is a part of the brain which controls the balance of the body, and sometimes there needs to be a communication between this balance and the thinking. For example, when you are riding a bicycle, imagine when you were a kid and you were you were learning to how to ride a bicycle. So now, when you balance a bicycle, that is a function of cerebellum, and that is stored as a memory in cerebellum. Like this is how you should ride a bicycle. When you turn so much left, you fall down. So all these information should also be ingrained in the cerebellum. So cerebellum is a part which controls the balance of the body, and how you control the balance, that memory needs to be put in the cerebrum. Otherwise, each and every time when you do a cycle, you have to keep on thinking, oh, this is the way I should do it. But as you are trained in it now, as you have mastered the art of cycling, then nowadays you don't even think about it. You can just directly cycle. So that strong connection between how our body balances and the memory about the balance, that is actually being done by pons. Here relay means it acts as a connection. And also, as I just told you, cerebellum maintains the posture and balance of the body. When I say posture, when I ask you to sit straight, you're able to sit straight, even without thinking that how should I sit straight and all of that. That is because cerebellum has that information that this is how you sit straight, or this is how you kneel down, whatever it is. And also, usually when you sit, when you stand, for you to maintain that equilibrium position, to maintain the balance. So that is the main function of cerebellum. And also it enables us to make precise and accurate movements. What they mean here is how accurately can you move. For example, in sports or in other things, where you have to actually follow through a particular obstacle course or something. Imagine there is an obstacle race where you have to lower and you have to enter into a circle. So during all those times, cerebellum makes you understand how to change your body in order to get into the circle and whatever. Last is medulla. Medulla controls involuntary actions. There are certain actions that our body does even without our conscious thinking. Those are, for example, breathing and also swallowing, coughing, and vomiting. So swallowing is like you don't think that you have to swallow, you automatically swallow. You cough automatically when there's an allergy, and when you vomit, when there is an indigestion or something. So medulla controls all these involuntary actions, which we don't think, it just directly happens. That is the function of medulla. So with this, the parts of human brain and their functions have been discussed.